The anniversary dinner was supposed to be the easy part. 3 years together, engaged for 8 months, and I'd spent 2 weeks planning every detail: the private room at Vellum, the string quartet cover of the song from our first date, the ring resizing I'd picked up that morning without telling her. I remember sitting at that table watching the door, checking my phone, feeling like the luckiest man in Ohio. Sarah walked in still in her uniform, badge catching the light, hair pulled back the way it always was after a shift. 5 years on the force, 2 commendations, the kind of woman who could talk down a domestic dispute and then come home and cry over a sad dog commercial. I loved her for the contradiction. I stood up too fast and knocked my water glass, and she laughed at that, the Real laugh, the one I fell for in the first place. Then he walked in behind her. I didn't recognize him at first, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket like he was trying too hard to look like he hadn't aged. Sarah turned, saw him, and her whole face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Warmth. The kind of warmth I hadn't seen aimed at me in months, and I told myself that was just stress from the job, just exhaustion, just life. "Jacob," she said, "you remember me mentioning Tyler?" I didn't. Not really. Some name from some story about high school, some ex she'd dated for 2 years before college, some guy she said meant nothing anymore. But there he was, pulling out the chair next to hers like he'd been invited, and she wasn't stopping him. They talked for 40 minutes. About people I didn't know. About a lake house I'd never heard of. About the time he taught her to drive stick shift, and she reached over and touched his forearm when she laughed, and I sat there with a ring in my pocket and a string quartet playing our song to an audience of 3, watching my fiancée look at another man the way she used to look at me. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself for 6 more weeks, actually, because that's who I was, a man who gave people the benefit of the doubt until the doubt ran out completely. Sarah and I met at a charity 5K, back when I was still working retail management and she was 2 years into patrol. She'd stopped to help me when I rolled my ankle at mile 2, walked the rest of the course with me talking about nothing, and by the time we crossed the finish line I'd already decided I wanted to marry her. I know how that sounds. I didn't care. I remember the year I lost my job at the distribution center and she covered rent for 4 months without ever once making me feel small about it. I remember driving 2 hours each way every weekend when she did the training rotation in Columbus, just so she wouldn't spend her one day off alone. I remember giving up my apartment lease to move into hers because she asked, and I remember never once regretting it, not even when her hours got long and her patience got short and the woman I fell in love with started coming home more tired than warm. 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, I found a resized wedding band sitting in a box, made the reservation, called her sister to help pick flowers. 2 days before, Sarah came home glowing, said she'd run into someone from her old life, said it was so random and so nice, said his name like it belonged in our house. And now this. Tyler's hand near hers on the white tablecloth. Her leaning in to hear him better over the quartet. Me invisible in my own engagement dinner. I didn't say anything that night. I sat there and smiled when spoken to and paid the check and drove us home in silence. She didn't seem to notice, and I told myself I'd bring it up gently in the morning, like a reasonable man, like someone who trusted his partner enough to ask instead of accuse. I brought it up over coffee. She laughed it off. "Tyler's just a friend now, Jacob, we dated in high school, it's ancient history." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly that I let it go for another 5 weeks, watching her phone light up more at night, watching her step out onto the porch to take calls she used to take in the living room, watching her come home from coffee with friends smelling like a cologne that wasn't mine. The night everything broke was a Tuesday. She'd told me she was working a double, back-to-back patrol shifts, home by 11. I believed her because I always believed her. But my car was in the shop, and I needed her spare key from her gym bag, and when I unzipped the front pocket to find it, her phone slid out onto the kitchen counter, screen lit up mid-notification. "Tyler, can't stop thinking about last night. You looked incredible out of that uniform." I stood in my own kitchen holding a phone that wasn't mine, reading 6 words that ended 3 years of my life, and I felt the floor tilt under me like the whole house had decided to betray me too. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until 11:40 when her car pulled into the driveway, and I watched her walk in still buttoning her jacket, hair down instead of up, no gun belt, no patrol log, nothing that said double shift except the lie she'd told me that morning. "You're up late," she said, too casual, too practiced. "Where were you?" I said. Not a question. A verdict already halfway formed. "I told you. Double shift." I set the phone on the table between us, screen still lit, Tyler's message glowing up at her like an accusation with a face. I watched every muscle in her body go rigid. "It's not what it looks like," she started, and I actually laughed, one ugly bark of a sound I didn't recognize coming out of my own throat. "Don't," I said. Don't you dare say that to me. Not to me. Jacob. How long? My voice came out steadier than I expected. How long, Sarah? And don't lie to me again, because I swear to God I will know. She sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her up, and the silence stretched out long enough that I had my answer before she gave it to me. Since the anniversary dinner, she said, and even in the wreckage of that moment I noted the word since, like there was a timeline, like she'd tracked it, like it had a start date she could recite. It just happened. Seeing him again. It brought back things I thought I'd let go of. You've been sleeping with him for 5 weeks. It's not, she stopped. Restarted. It's not just sleeping with him. I think I still love him. I want to tell you I stayed calm. I didn't. I stood up so fast the chair went over backward, and I was yelling before I even decided to yell, years of careful patience breaking open all at once. I asked her how many times. I asked her if it was in our bed. I asked her if she'd laughed at me the way she laughed with him at that table, and she flinched at that one, actually flinched, because she knew exactly what I'd seen that night and had let me sit there thinking I was crazy for noticing. You let me plan a wedding, I said. You let me pick out a date. You let me spend $400 resizing a ring while you were texting him from the bathroom. I was going to tell you. When? After the wedding. After the honeymoon. I was shaking. Was any of the last 5 weeks real? Any of it? She tried to explain, something about stress, about the job wearing her down, about Tyler understanding a part of her life I never could because he'd known her before the badge, before the trauma calls, before everything hardened. I didn't want her excuses. I didn't want her explanation of how convenient it was that an old flame reappeared exactly when she needed someone to blame for choosing him over me. I told her every excuse was garbage, that plenty of people have hard jobs and hard weeks and don't sleep with their ex behind their partner's back. It's over, I said, and my voice finally cracked on the word, 3 years collapsing into one syllable. We're done. The wedding's cancelled. I walked to the mantel where the engagement photo sat in a frame I'd bought her for Christmas, the two of us laughing on a beach in Michigan, and I turned it face down so hard the glass cracked. It felt like the only honest thing left to do in that house. Jacob, please. Don't, I said again, quieter this time, because I didn't have any yelling left in me. You don't get to cry now. You don't get to want me back now that I know. I packed a bag that night and slept at my brother Aaron's place, lying awake on his pull-out couch replaying 5 weeks of my life like a movie I'd watched wrong the first time, seeing all the lies I'd let myself explain away. The late nights. The new perfume habit. The phone that started needing a passcode 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner. I'd noticed everything and believed none of it, because believing it meant losing her, and I hadn't been ready to lose her. I was ready now. For 2 days I didn't leave Aaron's guest room except to shower. I didn't eat much. I lay there running through every good memory like it was evidence in a trial, trying to figure out where the woman I fell in love with had ended and the woman who'd lied to my face for 5 straight weeks had begun. Aaron didn't push. He just left food outside the door and told me, on the second night, that I could hate her as loud as I wanted as long as I did it somewhere he could hear me. So I did. By the 3rd day, the grief had curdled into something colder, something with edges. I stopped asking myself what I'd done wrong and started asking what I was going to do about it. Sarah had spent 3 years building a life on top of my trust, my money, my patience, and my silence, and she'd been willing to burn all of it down for 5 weeks with a man she used to date in high school. I decided somewhere around 2 a.m. that I wasn't going to be the only one who paid for that. Aaron helped first. He'd never liked Tyler's name the 2 times Sarah mentioned it over the years, said something about a gut feeling, and now his gut feeling had a receipt. He started making calls to mutual friends, casually, carefully, asking if anyone knew Tyler Brennan, if anyone had seen him around town lately. It didn't take long. Turned out Tyler worked as a loan officer at a regional bank 2 towns over, recently divorced, 1 young daughter he saw every other weekend. Turned out he'd been posting photos on social media with location tags that put him at a specific coffee shop most Tuesday and Thursday mornings, coincidentally, Sarah's days off. My college friend Priya, who worked in HR and had a mind like a filing cabinet, found something else. Tyler had been written up twice at his last job for inappropriate conduct with a coworker before his divorce finalized. A pattern, not an accident. I felt something settle into place reading that, not surprise, exactly, more like confirmation that I hadn't lost Sarah to some singular, unrepeatable soulmate. I'd lost her to a man with a track record. I started building a file. Screenshots I'd saved from her phone before I left. I'm not proud of it, but I'd copied every message thread before walking out the door, every date, every admission she'd typed to her sister about not knowing what to do about Jacob. Aaron's notes on Tyler's schedule. Priya's employment history. A timeline that started at our anniversary dinner and didn't stop. Sarah texted me 41 times over those first 2 weeks. I read maybe half of them. I'm so sorry. I made the worst mistake of my life. Please just talk to me. I ended it with Tyler, it meant nothing, I want you. I didn't answer any of them. Every unanswered text felt like a small, cold kind of power, the only power I had left, and I used it. The first move was financial. We'd shared a joint checking account for the last 18 months, mostly for household bills, and I still had the login. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I wasn't interested in becoming the villain of my own story, but I closed my half cleanly, redirected my paycheck deposits, and sent her a formal, documented notice that I was withdrawing from every shared financial obligation effective immediately. The apartment lease was in her name. I simply stopped paying my portion and let her feel, for the first time in a long time, what it cost to run a household alone. She called 11 times that day. I let it go to voicemail every time. The second move took more nerve. I put together everything, the screenshots, the dates, the timeline, into one clean document, and I sent it to 3 people: her sister, who'd always adored me and deserved to know why the wedding wasn't happening, her captain at the precinct, not to get her fired, but because department policy required disclosure of conduct that could affect professional judgment, and an officer conducting an affair with a man who had a documented pattern of workplace misconduct was exactly the kind of judgment call that mattered, and, last, Tyler's ex-wife, whose name I found through Priya's search and whose custody arrangement, it turned out, hinged partly on Tyler's demonstrated stability. I didn't fabricate a single thing. I didn't need to. The truth did all the damage on its own. Sarah's captain didn't fire her. I never expected that, and frankly didn't want it, because 5 years of good police work don't evaporate over a personal failure, but she was pulled from a specialized unit she'd been angling toward for a year, the promotion put on indefinite hold while an internal review looked at whether her judgment had been compromised. I heard about it secondhand from a mutual friend who still talked to her. Sarah had wanted that unit more than almost anything in her career. She lost it in the same month she lost me. Tyler's ex-wife filed an emergency motion to revisit the custody schedule, citing new information about his conduct and stability. I don't know all the details of how that played out. I made a point of not following it too closely, because by then I'd started to feel less like a man seeking justice and more like a man trying not to become someone he didn't recognize, but I heard he lost his standard weekend visitation down to supervised visits for 3 months while the court sorted through it. Whatever comfort Sarah thought she'd find in him, it came wrapped in consequences that reached both their lives. The last strike was smaller, more personal, and honestly the one that gave me the least satisfaction and the most relief. I called off the wedding formally, cancelled the venue, which had a strict cancellation policy that cost me half my deposit, but I didn't care. I never wanted to see that ballroom again. I called the caterer, the florist, the string quartet who'd played our song to an empty betrayal. I posted nothing on social media, said nothing dramatic to mutual friends. I simply, quietly, made it clear to everyone who mattered that the wedding wasn't happening and why, without ever raising my voice online the way I'd raised it in our kitchen that Tuesday night. By the 5th week, Sarah's life had started to visibly crumble, at least from what filtered back to me through Aaron and mutual friends who still checked in. She'd been passed over for the unit. Her sister wasn't speaking to her. Apparently the sister had liked me more than she'd ever admitted, and felt the affair reflected something ugly she hadn't wanted to see in Sarah before. Her friend group, small to begin with, had split roughly down the middle, some sympathizing, most quietly withdrawing. She was, from what I heard, drinking more, sleeping less, showing up to shifts running on fumes. Tyler, meanwhile, had stopped answering her calls once his custody situation went sideways. The reappeared high school sweetheart hadn't been worth the collateral damage to his own life, apparently, and he'd cut her loose the moment things got complicated. She texted me again in week 6. I lost everything and it's my fault, not yours. I'm not asking you to take me back. I just need you to know I understand what I did. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, or not only out of cruelty, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say to a woman I no longer trusted to mean anything she typed. She showed up at Aaron's place once, in week 7, uninvited, mascara streaked, asking to talk for 5 minutes. I stood in the doorway and told her, calmly, that there was nothing left to say, and when she wouldn't leave, when she kept reaching for my arm the way she used to when we argued and always made up, I told her if she didn't get back in her car I'd call it in myself, and something about hearing that from me, a threat spoken in the same flat cadence she probably used on strangers during a traffic stop, finally made her leave. She tried one more time, 2 weeks after that, sending a long message trying to explain that the affair wasn't really about Tyler, that it was about her feeling invisible in her own engagement, about feeling like the wedding planning had become about me and not us. I read that one twice, and for about 10 minutes I let myself feel the old ache of wanting to fix things, wanting to understand her side. Then I remembered the message on her phone. "You looked incredible out of that uniform." Remembered 5 weeks of doubles that weren't doubles. Remembered her laughing with him under the string quartet playing our song. Whatever she'd felt invisible about, it didn't turn into honesty. It turned into a lie sustained for over a month, dressed up and served to me across a candlelit table on the night I planned to propose. I didn't respond to that message either. I blocked her number the same night, not in anger this time, but in something quieter and more final, the recognition that continuing to read her explanations was its own form of staying attached to a story that had already ended. Somewhere in week 8, I stopped waiting for her to apologize enough to matter, and I started actually living again. I moved into my own place, small, 1 bedroom, nothing like the life Sarah and I had built, but mine, completely mine, no shared lease, no shared anything. I started running again, something I'd let slide during the 2 years of wedding planning and long work hours, and by the 3rd month I dropped the 15 pounds I hadn't even realized I'd put on from stress eating and late-night guilt-avoidance snacking. Aaron dragged me to his gym, and I started lifting, slowly at first, then with something that felt almost like anger channeled somewhere useful. I cut my hair different. Bought clothes that fit the person I was becoming instead of the person who'd spent 3 years shrinking himself around someone else's schedule. Work noticed before I did. I'd been a mid-level manager at the distribution center for 4 years, competent but never hungry, mostly because so much of my energy went into managing a relationship that, in hindsight, had been quietly managing me. Without that drain, I had focus I hadn't had in years. I picked up a regional operations certification I'd been putting off. I volunteered for a process overhaul project nobody else wanted, stayed late 3 nights a week not because I had nowhere else to be, though I didn't, not really, not yet, but because I finally had the bandwidth to care about something that was entirely mine. For months after the breakup, my district manager called me into her office and offered me a promotion to regional operations lead, a role I hadn't even known was opening, with a salary jump that made my old joint checking account look like a joke. I started therapy too, nothing dramatic, just a Thursday afternoon appointment with a counselor named Dr. Alvarez who helped me understand that my instinct to overtrust, to explain away red flags, wasn't a character flaw so much as a pattern I'd learned somewhere and could unlearn. I didn't talk about revenge in those sessions. I talked about why I'd ignored 6 weeks of warning signs, about what it meant to rebuild trust in myself before I ever trusted anyone else again. Around the 5th month, Aaron introduced me to a coworker of his named Emily, careful, low pressure, more coffee than date. She was a high school biology teacher, funny in a dry way that caught me off guard, and when I told her, early, because I didn't want to build another relationship on hidden things, that I'd been engaged and it had ended badly, she just nodded and said, "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere." We took it slow. Genuinely slow, not the performative slow of someone secretly counting days until they could rush things. 6 months in, I trusted her more than I trusted Sarah in the last year of our relationship, not because Emily was perfect, but because she was honest in the small unglamorous ways, telling me when she was annoyed instead of performing fine, telling me about her own past instead of leaving gaps I'd later fall into. Friends started commenting on the change before I fully saw it myself. Priya told me at a birthday dinner that I looked like a different person, lighter somehow, like I'd put down something heavy I didn't know I'd been carrying. My mother, who'd never fully trusted Sarah's warmth, too polished, she used to say, though she never explained what she meant, told me she was proud of how I'd handled myself, that she'd watched me grieve without becoming bitter, build without becoming cruel. Co-workers who barely knew about my personal life started asking what had changed. More than one person, hearing the short version of the story, told me flatly that I'd dodged something I should be grateful for. I heard through Aaron, second-hand and unsolicited, that Sarah had moved to a smaller apartment across town after the lease ended, that the internal review had eventually cleared her of formal misconduct but the promotion never came back around, that she and Tyler hadn't spoken in months. I felt, hearing all of it, less satisfaction than I expected. Mostly I felt distance, the specific, clean distance of a life that no longer orbited hers. 10 months after the anniversary dinner that ended everything, I ran into Sarah at a grocery store 2 towns over, the kind of coincidence that felt almost engineered by whatever force enjoys giving people closure they didn't ask for. She looked thinner than I remembered, tired around the eyes in a way 5 years on patrol had never quite managed to make her look. I was there picking up dinner for Emily and me, nothing special, just a Tuesday night in, wearing a jacket that fit the new version of my body, standing straighter than I had in the last 2 years of our relationship without even realizing it. "Jacob," she said, and her voice cracked on my name the way it used to crack on things that actually mattered to her, back before I learned that crack didn't always mean what I thought it meant. "Sarah. You look," she stopped, seemed to reconsider the sentence entirely. You look really good. Thanks. I didn't return the compliment. It wasn't cruelty. It just wasn't true, and I'd promised myself somewhere around month 4 that I wasn't going to lie to make anyone comfortable anymore, myself included. She asked if we could talk, gestured toward the empty end of the cereal aisle like it was neutral ground. I checked my watch. Emily was expecting me in 20 minutes, and decided I had exactly enough time to close a door I'd left slightly open in the back of my mind for almost a year. I think about that night a lot, she said. The dinner. I should have told you the second I saw him again that something was happening. Instead I let it become everything it became. I lost my promotion. I lost my sister, basically. I lost you. Her eyes were wet, and for the first time I noticed she wasn't performing it, wasn't reaching for my arm, wasn't trying to close distance between us physically the way she used to when she wanted something. Tyler's remarried already, did you know that? Some woman from the bank. I was apparently just a placeholder, I guess, for whatever he needed to feel young again. I let that sit for a second, watching her absorb her own sentence. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel bad for me, she said. I know I don't get that. I wanted you to know I understand now. What I threw away. What I did to you. I appreciate you saying that, I said, and I meant it, in the small, distant way you can mean something about a stranger's hardship. I hope you figure out whatever you need to figure out. Is there any chance, she started, and I watched her lose her nerve halfway through the sentence, watched her decide not to finish it and ask a smaller, safer version instead. Are you happy? I am, I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said in that conversation. Genuinely. I have a job I'm proud of. I have someone in my life who's never once made me doubt what she tells me. I sleep fine at night. I paused. I used to think losing you was the worst thing that could happen to me. Turns out it was the thing that let me actually find out who I am without shrinking myself around someone else's choices. Her face did something complicated, grief and recognition and, underneath it, something like relief, like she'd been dreading a version of this conversation where I screamed at her one more time, and instead got a version where I simply, calmly, didn't need anything from her anymore. I really am sorry, Jacob. I know, I said. I hope it was worth it. I didn't say it cruelly. I said it the way you'd note a fact about weather. Then I told her I had somewhere to be, and I meant that too, Emily, dinner, a Tuesday night that belonged entirely to a life Sarah had no part in anymore, and I walked toward the checkout without looking back at the cereal aisle, without needing to see her face to know it had crumpled the way faces do when a door closes for the last time and everyone in the room finally admits it's locked. 2 years later, I married Emily in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard, no ballroom, no string quartet, just 40 people who actually knew us and a cake Erin nearly dropped walking it across the lawn. I'd been promoted twice more by then, running operations across 3 regional distribution centers, work I was proud of in a way that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone who doubted me. Emily and I bought a house 8 months after the wedding, small but ours, and some evenings I'd stand in the kitchen making dinner and catch myself thinking how strange it was that the worst night of my life had been the hinge point that swung me into the best years of it. I heard, occasionally, through the thinning thread of mutual acquaintances, that Sarah was still on patrol, still single as far as anyone knew, still living in that smaller apartment across town. I heard she'd tried dating a couple times and it hadn't stuck. I didn't feel anything sharp when I heard it, no triumph, no lingering ache, just the flat acknowledgement of a life running parallel to mine, one I'd stopped checking in on because I genuinely no longer needed to. Some nights, usually after a good day, after Emily and I have eaten dinner on the back porch and the sky's gone that particular orange it goes in late summer, I think back to that anniversary dinner, the string quartet, the ring in my pocket, Sarah's hand near his on the tablecloth, and I don't feel the rage anymore. I feel something closer to gratitude, strange as that sounds. That night broke something I thought couldn't survive being broken. It also showed me, eventually, exactly what I was capable of rebuilding when I stopped waiting for someone else to hand me a life worth having. I wouldn't change a single thing that happened after. Not the anger, not the file I built in those first cold weeks, not the slow work of learning to trust myself again before I trusted anyone else. It all led here, to a porch, a wife who tells me the truth even when it's inconvenient, a life I built with my own hands out of the wreckage of one that was never as solid as I'd let myself believe. The door I closed that Tuesday night stayed closed. And for the first time in a long time, I never once wished it open.